Welcome to Art Toronto. My name is Mia Nielsen. I'm the director of the show. And today I'm thrilled to welcome you to this special conversation between Dr. Kenneth Montague, Toronto collector and director of Wedge Curatorial Projects. He's here in conversation with the AGO's Dr. Julie Crooks, and they're going to be discussing As We Rise, Photography from the Black Atlantic. This is the first book published on the Wedge Collection by Aperture. Enjoy this conversation. That's going to be a good one.
All right. Hi, everyone. It's Kenneth Montague from the Wedge Collection, and I am here today with my good friend, Julie Crooks. Hi, Julie.
Hi, Kenneth, or Dr. Montague.
Hey,
how are you?
Just fine. Great to see you. We're here to talk a little bit about a new book from the Aperture Foundation featuring works from my art collection, the Wedge Collection. So a quick word about the book. It is a kind of a collaboration with the Aperture Foundation, and I've had a long relationship with Aperture, starting, I think, as a teenager reading many photography books that have meant so much in my life, from Diane Arbus onwards. And it's a kind of a thrill to actually have Aperture producing a book about my collection. So it's photography only, as Aperture is a photo-based organization. And the idea with the book is to sort of give a snapshot of works in my collection, which, you know, have a focus around artistic practices from Africa and throughout the diaspora. So we landed on a title of As We Rise, which really is around my late father, Spurgeon Montague's saying, lifting as we rise. So he was always talking about the fact that as, you know, we do well, we have to pull up other people in our community. So lift as we rise. And I think the people at Aperture thought it was an apt metaphor for this moment with the Black artists that we're celebrating in the collection. So a little bit about the subtitle, Photography from the Black Atlantic. That was originally posed as a title because of our initial interviews, where it was determined that almost all of the work in the Wedge Collection is featuring photographers and artists that live and work in areas and regions that are peripheral to the Atlantic, the UK, Africa, the continent, South America, the Caribbean, United States, Canada. And so that became a kind of a guiding principle. But in the end, we decided to organize the works and you kind of look at them through a lens that has to do with the various tropes in the collection, and that is community, identity, and power. And so, you know, the book itself, and I've actually got the book in my hand here, first handbound copy, the book itself is organized as such. And so you'll see community, identity, and power. And, you know, running through the book, you'll notice that it's a picture book. And there's a lot of information that has to do with the context of the work by a varied cast of friends in the art world, of which you are one, Julie. So moving to the next slide, we'll see that there's a kind of a list of contributors. And on that list, you'll see a preface from Teju Cole, who's a beautiful writer on photography from the New York Times. Mark Seeley, who's an old friend and the director at Autograph in London. Liz Akiriko, who's a Toronto friend and independent curator. And then a list of varied writers from around the world with an accent and focus on Canadian writers in the book. The image that we see on this page by James Vanderzee, Couple in Raccoon Coats, is the image that kind of started it all for me as a 10-year-old seeing this at the Detroit Institute of Arts. So I was born in Windsor in Canada across the river, and I used to go there on weekends with my family. And that's an image that I really felt that I wanted to have a longer conversation with than just seeing it on a wall in the gallery. And it turns out that Deborah Willis, who's one of our writers and a noted art historian, photography specialist, had the same reaction as a young woman with this image. So it's interesting. She ended up writing about it in the book. So a final note about the title font itself. It was developed by Trey Seals, who's a emerging Black typographer, and he based it on those beautiful hand-painted signs from the sanitation workers during civil rights movement, the signs that we know that say, "I am a man," and it's got that kind of handwritten look to it. And that's the feeling of As We Rise that we wanted to kind of portray. All right, so I think maybe we'll now move to some slides and talk about some of the works. Although we know that it's organized in the book as Community Identity Power, I think for today, it might be interesting to look at it through another lens, which is geographical. So we'll start with some artists from the UK. This is an image of a young man in Handsworth Park in Birmingham by Vanley Burke. And I know you have a relationship with the artist, Julie. Maybe you could say a few words about what this image means to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Vanley Burke, often considered the kind of godfather of Black British photography. Just a remarkable, several, I guess, many years of documenting Black communities in Birmingham. And this work in particular, as you know, I think is really kind of his iconic photograph featuring Winford Fagan as a child with his bike and his hands akimbo and proudly showing off his Union Jack on his handlebars at a time in which, there was an increase in kind of anti-Black sentiments in the UK at the time. So the fact that, Burke catches this young man and he's kind of presenting himself the way he wants to be presented, but also asserting himself as a citizen, as a kind of descendant of the Windrush generation. I think it's so powerful and compelling.
Thank you, Julia. That's great. On the next slide, we'll see another artist from the UK who happens to be a friend, Dennis Morris. We met many years ago when we showed his work with my nonprofit Wedge Curatorial Projects, I think back in 2004. And, he's a Jamaican British photographer that is kind of well known for images of Bob Marley of the Sex Pistols, and he took those as a teenager. But really the personal project that resonated for me was, when he went back to his old community where he grew up in Hackney in London, a community that's full of Caribbean immigrants from the Windrush generation. And he documented, kind of the beauty of ordinary life, but also the strife and the struggle in that community. And I think Dennis is also featured in a show that Julie's producing that is out right now and on the wall at the AGO, Fragments of Epic Memories. So Julie, tell us a little bit more about Dennis Morris.
Well, again, I mean, I was introduced to his work probably around the same time you were. Have always been kind of fascinated by his, of course, the images are always very strong, striking, as like this photograph. You really kind of engage with the subjects. And the two works that are in the show and Fragments of Epic Memory are, of course, on loan from you, from your extensive collection, and feature, one is a kind of Jamaican sound system, in London and the heyday of the kind of sound system, house party. And the second one features some very bespoke and dapper Black men who are part of the kind of Black house. So again, very striking photographs, really produced by, I would say, a master of British photography.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. I mean, looking at Dennis's images, I think a lot about the influence of those images, even in, say, the recent Steve McQueen production, Small Axe, feels so much like the work that he did, through the 70s and 80s.
Absolutely.
Kind of fascinating. Yeah. On the next slide, you'll see a work that I know Julie and I both love so much because we love the artist, Liz Johnson Arthur, who is a London-based photographer who actually grew up in Bulgaria, Germany, and Russia. And, she didn't have a lot of contact with other Black folks at that time. And she kind of used photography as a way of connecting to her own community. And she has this amazing Black balloon archive, which this image is from, this sort of growing, living archive of Black folks that she encounters as a fashion photographer, as a photographer who does assignments for magazines and so forth, and now as a fine art photographer. I saw many of those works on display at the Art Gallery of Ontario in a show that was around the AMIA Prize, and got to meet the artist at that time. And it's very interesting to talk to her and see how much she lives and breathes the work that she's involved in. She could be in one of her own photographs. That she's just someone who kind of resonates with me because she loves her community, and it's evident in the work. Yeah. We'll move from the UK maybe to works from the African continent that are in the collection that are featured in the book. For me, a lot of the early works that I was interested in as a collector were exploring Black life on the continent at a time of change when many of the African countries were coming into their own in terms of independence movements and casting away their kind of colonial chains. So this is work that I bought, 2 decades ago from Seydou Keita, who was still alive at the time, and showcased actually back in year 2000. But the women on the Vespa, this could be an image in Vogue magazine right now. The style is so kind of contemporary and identifiable. It's like, they're wearing dresses that have traditional fabrics, but they're also, rocking a completely contemporary kind of Western look with the purse. And, there are kind of different tropes and ideas here, like the Vespa, that kind of remind you that this is a moment of modernism in West Africa. And, this is an artist who kind of worked as a portrait photographer with an outdoor studio, but, really in the end, the works are way beyond just taking snapshots of people. This is an important document and a beautiful kind of aesthetic kind of result as well. He's an incredible artist. I know that you, Julie, have a specialty. I think your PhD is really around a lot of this early work, photography in Africa around this era, 1950s, 60s. Maybe if we move to the next slide, you could talk a little bit about Malik Sidibe and what you know about this iconic image.
Yeah, I mean, I would say about both Keita and Sidibe is, they're really important roles in shaping photography, as modernist photographers. in that they are creating photographs at, on a kind of continuum of, for want of a better word, the development of the history of photography in especially West Africa, and specifically Mali, which becomes this, center of photography. And because, there's great European, of course, French influence, so of course the women on the Vespa and their, Chanel bags, which, so yeah, I mean, those many of Keita's photographs actually ended up, or some of his photographs ended up in Vogue, in an actual Vogue spread, which I think is really, really fascinating. But Sidibe's Christmas Eve, again, iconic photograph. Keita is known for his portraits, outdoor or indoor. And the younger Sidibe was known for actually going out into the community, capturing the kind of verve of that moment, especially, I think he said, really loved to be around young people, so capturing their own lives and antics on the beach or at a picnic, or here, as we see, celebrating Christmas Eve with just this very simple, photograph of two people dancing on the eve of a new era, of a new year, and it's always been one of my favorites.
Yeah, the artist who became a friend, he died recently, but I remember seeing him in his sort of storefront studio in in Bagadashi, in Bamako. And he said that it's actually a brother and sisters, and the older brother's teaching the younger sister kind of how to do this new dance from, America. You see the record player on the far right, the empty bottles. It's kind of, end of the night, Christmas Eve. Like it's very relatable. Like, I mean, this could be a party in Scarborough, it's fascinating.
Well, and also that Western influence, right? I mean, these kids were really reaching out looking to the West for their influences. So James Brown, and they're probably doing the twist. Well, I don't know, or something relatable, similar. So yeah,
it's wonderful. Moving to the next slide, something completely different. This is an artist from Morocco, Hassan Hajjaj, and the work that he's well known for is this series called Kesh Angels. It's in Marrakesh. And, the young creatives that he sort of depicts here, this woman's a well-known dancer in Morocco and part of his artistic sort of group. They're always kind of depicted with these very familiar kind of tropes. There's advertising, consumerism, and, the effect of globalization on his community. There's these incredible frames, he hand makes these frames that have actual, products that he grew up with, like old fashioned Fanta orange cans here, you can see with Arabic writing here. And, there's also a political statement about Nestle being this big multinational corporation that's giving, offering milk powder, to women instead of them just using their natural milk, breast milk and so forth. And so he's kind of all over the place with this riot of color and action and pattern and design, fashion, but he is making a statement. And I think that seeing these works together, with others, you can really get the feeling of someone who's kind of, got a new way of thinking about his own culture. I really love Hassan and think what he's doing is, very unique in modern photography. It's a hard trick to do something that always is recognizable, but looks like nothing else, Yeah. So moving to the next slide. I think we'll move away from the African continent and think about work from the Caribbean and South America. There's a particular resonance for Julie and for myself with artists from the Caribbean, both of us being of Caribbean descent, and also kind of understanding the sameness and difference between the islands, between the experiences back home versus migrating to, you know, new places like the UK and Canada. It kind of has a certain specialness to it for us. So, you know, I find as a collector, I'm very attracted to works by artists from the Caribbean, and Ebony Patterson is a great example. She's Jamaican born, still lives between Jamaica and the United States. She's a successful artist who is kind of mining a particular area. She's thinking a lot about Black masculinity, but also that move between the masculine and the feminine, and a kind of a fluidity, a gender fluidity that you see on the street in Jamaica. She's just calling it what it is. And it's very interesting to sort of think about the many ways that she does this. In this instance, it's a photo-based work. It's very multi kind of, you know, media. There's elements of photography. There are little doilies that are from, you know, like her grandmother's chest of drawers, you know, they're painted gold and you see them like a halo behind the subject's head. There's this kind of look at fashion. There's a polo shirt that he's wearing. You know, there are the sunglasses with the sequins and the sparkle. There's a three-dimensional sort of vibe to this. And when you see the actual work, you see the sparkles that fall off it, and everything is sort of against this deep red color. There's so much going on aesthetically, and yet there's a deeper message, and that message is made more clear in some of her video work. She's also a filmmaker, and maybe Julie can talk about a particular work that's new to the AGO's collection that's in her current show, Fragments.
Yeah, I think this series, Disciples, is really extends to, you're right, the kind of current video work. The work that's in the show, Fragments, is Three Kings Weep. And it takes up a lot of the motifs that you see in this work, actually, the kind of, you know, colorful and almost embroidered background. It's very floral. But of course, this is a film and it features, again, young Black men, who knows, maybe from, you know, Kingston, Jamaica. But we see them kind of bare-chested and in reverse, putting on layers of clothing, and then kind of bejeweled accoutrements, and then sunglasses, a hat, or a kind of neckerchief. And I think these are all kind of symbolic, you know, as you said, Kenneth, about, you know, kind of these blurring of identities, you know, talking about masculinity within a society like, you know, Jamaica, where it's very, very complicated. And in that video, the three subjects are crying, they're weeping. That's why it's called Three Kings Weep, as they are putting on these layers. So are these layers of protection, you know, to protect them against the kind of onslaught of, you know, trauma and violence and, you know, stereotypes that are, you know, that they're subsumed by because of who they are, by virtue of who they are in that society. So it's a beautiful poetic work, just like this multimedia work that you have, Kenneth.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. It gives us a real insight into the artist. And if we move to the next slide, we'll see work by Paul Anthony Smith, Jamaican-born artist who's based in New York now. I love this particular work in my collection. It's a large photograph, and it currently hangs in the staff room of my office. I'm a dentist in Toronto, and I have this staff room where we all kind of take off all our PPE during this strange moment of coronavirus and the pandemic, and everybody sort of, kind of de-stresses and imagines themselves, or imagines a moment that we used to enjoy when we could all be together like this without wearing masks and just hanging out outside and loving each other. This is a Caribbean Day parade, and there are so many around the world. This one's in Brooklyn, much like Caravana in Toronto. And you see, people all ages, all races, all genders just hanging out, and celebrating independence, but also, just enjoying themselves. And it's a kind of a image that is about concealing and revealing. He uses this unique kind of process called picotage. He's sort of picking away at the actual photographic print. So you see the white of the paper pulled up in those stripes that kind of in some way blurs the image and makes you think about what we see and what we don't see happening in the scene. I really think Paul Anthony Smith is onto something really unique with this, not only his picotage, but also, mining this particular area, thinking about, the tropes and the ideas around all of these festivals, Jean Canoe and, Caravana and so forth. He's doing that in a very kind of new way, and very important artist. I'm sure you'd agree, Julie. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. He is really one that I'm truly fascinated by. I want to see how he's going to develop. But truly the kind of using the picotage approach, that comes out of the fact that, and he worked with clay a lot. So I really like this idea of, kind of a transference of, one media to another, using, this tool to think about obscuring Black bodies, right? Where Black bodies have been so available through photography. He's now creating these geometric shapes, or, I guess, geometric shapes, and as a way to kind of give you access, but not really. He's in charge of the amount of access that you're going to receive. So like you, I'm a very big fan.
Yeah, it's a great way of putting it. I really appreciate your insight on the work. The next slide shows work from a Brazilian photographer who's still around. He's maybe 66 years old now. He took these images in the 1980s in Belo Horizonte in the southeastern part of Brazil, a place that has a very recognizable African culture. It's a place where, as we all know, the height of slavery really took place in Brazil. There, per capita, more folks were taken from Africa and brought to Brazil than any other place. And you've got these incredibly rich communities of generations of Black people. And then weirdly, there's just not so much documentation. There's a lot of ethnographic work, but there's not a lot of work that just explores just, hanging out with the family, and kind of in a lot of ways, his photographs are a kind of a document of, the beauty of just ordinary life. And so he probably took over 300,000 photos by his own estimate. He was a party photographer, like Malik Sidibe. He took pictures at weddings, anniversaries. So many people in the community in Belo Horizonte have his work in their family albums. And, he probably lost most of his negatives over time. People threw out boxes, there was weather damage, but he has about 80,000 of them left, and he had them in storage in his house. And a curator in that part of the world kind of discovered this treasure trove only 5 years ago. And so since 2015, he's sort of been on the map as this important photographer. And I think he will be better known as time goes on. I was kind of very happy to be one of the first collectors of his work. And we'll showcase a few of the images in As We Rise. Moving maybe to the next section, we'll talk about some work from the African American community. So these are images by Black American photographers. Ming Smith was born in Detroit, just kind of where I was born, and she then moved to Chicago and kind of had a very successful career as a model. And she picked up the camera herself the whole time. She was taking great pictures. She showed up at MoMA one day and here's my portfolio, and they actually bought her work. So she became the first Black woman artist to have work in the Museum of Modern Art's collection. That's really kind of indicative of the person she is. She's a do-it-yourself, I can do it. She was asked to join Kamwinye, an important collective of Black photographers founded by Roy DeCarava and Louis Draper, among others. And she was the only woman in this important photo collective in the 70s. So an incredibly important life that only recently is being celebrated. I know that there's some great work of Ming's that you brought into the photography collection at the AGO, Julie. You could probably tell us a little bit more about the artist.
Well, I think you've set it up really well, Kenneth. Yes, we brought in a group of Ming Smith's work. I think you're right, very kind of underrepresented, under-acknowledged, and definitely there's a kind of moment that she's experiencing, which is, well-deserved, because her work is, poetic. It is following in that the Kamwange collection workshops kind of approach, which is, trickled down by the great DeCarava because of, the kind of shadowy black and white portraits and scenes of everyday life, in Harlem.
And moving to the next photograph, we will look at work from Mclean Thomas, who I certainly know Julie has a great relationship with, as she brought her work for a very memorable solo show to the AGO a couple of years back. I've known Mickeleen, since maybe 2006 when I bought this work and met her on the same day at Art Basel Miami. She is known for these incredibly bold and innovative and sometimes very provocative images. In this case, it's a self-portrait. And in some ways that self-portrait, is mirroring the self-portrait you just saw with Ming Smith. There's a lot of self-portraiture in the Wedge collection. I think it's a great way of the artists sort of, using themselves to sort of think about their artistic practice. And it's really something that I personally value, because the collection is in a lot of ways about self and, one's own journey. And so Mickeleen's self-portrait here, she's wearing a wig, an Afro wig. She's wearing vintage clothes and has beautiful fabrics that, are kind of very typical tropes that she uses in her studio. But then, within this familiar kind of interior, domestic interior, she then has, many different stories that she's trying to tell, stories that we don't see very often in modern photography. It's sort of playing on the odalisque and that sort of, classic shot of, the woman lying back, on say a daybed, but her take on it is full of self-care, self-love, and really reflects a kind of a 1970s mode that she grew up in, thinking about her own mother too. So there's a lot going on in this image. Anything you'd want to add, Julie?
I think also, which, you have created your collection with lots of intersections in terms of what the photographers are doing, and kind of generationally, and in different geographies and different eras, because I think this work, the self-portrait, also references and riffs on Sedukita, with the, the layering of different fabrics, and, from her skirt to her shirt to the cover of the sofa. And Kieta's portraits would often have this, these different mingling of textures and fabrics that, serve to camouflage as well. So I think, and, Mickeleen was also very taken with Kieta's work. So you can see that influence layered into this photograph as well.
Yeah, it's great insight. Thank you, Julie. On the next image, we'll wait for that. Here we go. In this last set of images, we'll take it home and think about works by artists in Canada who are all still producing work. Maybe appropriately, we'll start with June Clark, who spent the first half of her life in New York. She's from Harlem, and then the second part of her life, kind of after the 70s, in Toronto. And so she's kind of the missing link in a lot of ways with the collection, and a lot of the images from American and Canadian artists. She's had many lives as an artist, and is multi-talented, does work in sculpture, but she also worked as a commercial photographer, and was the first Black photographer on staff at Toronto Life, which is, our kind of local, what's going on around town kind of journal. So when she was at Toronto Life, she did, a great series of works exploring the Black community in Toronto. And it also, of course, becomes this great document of fashion of the times. This is 1974, and it looks like this could be the source for a painting from Barclay Hendricks, in my mind. It's a pretty great kind of portrait, with the style and the pose, the gesture, and of course the setting is in a park in Toronto. It's just a very familiar thing for someone my age, remembering that look in 1970. So, Julie, I know you know the artist. Anything else you'd like to add about June?
Just again, like Ming, I feel we actually organized a panel with Ming Smith, Susie
Lake.
Thank you, Susie Lake, and June Clark. And it was incredible to have June be part of that conversation, because again, I would say, underlooked, undervalued until quite recently, especially her photographs. And also, this reminds me of Vanley Burke, having someone in the community, roving camera, and just capturing, a group of people that weren't necessarily at the, always visible, not all, in the best of light, and she is just, capturing these kind of quotidian moments for prosperity. And so now we can look back and see, what was happening in the community without any, and they're just simple, there's no strife, there's no, violence. This is just, two men enjoying a stroll in the park. So, yeah.
It's great. Moving to the next slide. This is a very iconic image in my collection. It was the cover image for a previous publication around a show called Positions Desired, which I organized around works by Black photographers from Canada in the collection. And, for me, there's something uniquely Canadian about the work, not just the obvious, wearing the parka, but also there's something about the gaze, the particular enigmatic look. I know this gaze. I can think of this young man, keeping a little something for himself while still wanting you to see who he is. It's got a kind of a duality to it. This is, thinking about an image that is really burned in my brain over many years. I can't escape, the fact that the artist Dawid Petros is someone who I followed over many years. I'm his first collector, and the evolution of that artist is kind of in some ways emblematic of the As We Rise artists that are featured in the book. I mean, Dawid was born in Eritrea, came with his family as refugees, grew up in the prairies in Saskatoon in Western Canada, came back to French Canada and went to art school at Concordia in Montreal, and then went to United States in Boston to do his master's. He now lives between Chicago and in Canada. And, he does a lot of work now. His practice, in fact, is centered around thinking about the movement of African people, specifically Europe and East Africa. And I think this work, in some ways, is the precursor. It's important. It's telling a uniquely Canadian story because, as Black folks, we're from everywhere here, and I feel like the gesture, that symbol, which is really, taken from a kind of a well-known painting in the Western over it. It's Albert Durer's self-portrait, painted in year 1500. He's taking that and making it his own. And this is years before the artist Nuka Hindi Wiley, who's also doing a similar trope. But independently, Dawid had this idea as an art project. This is something he did as an undergrad student. So when you think of it through all of those lenses, you realize how significant this work is and how fully formed this artist was coming out of art school. So, I don't know if you have anything to add, Julie, or if we'll move on.
I just wanted to add, of course, big fan of Dawid's work. I think this work, I've sat with it for a very long time. I've written about it. I keep coming back to it. And I think this enigma as to who this person is, Durer's self-portrait is it the figure of Christ? And I come back to it often because now I think about this work in relation to Ebony Patterson's work, right? So how do we, continue to represent Black male bodies, Black masculinities, and yes, I think you're right. The kind of movement, we can see the evolution of Dawid's work from a kind of, the portrait series, I think it's the transliteration series, to, more conceptual work. And it's been wonderful to kind of see how his photography, how his practice has really evolved in that way.
Thank you. The next slide features work by Sandra Brewster, who is an artist that I think we're all very proud of here in Toronto. She's based here, family's from Guyana. She talks a lot about her family's journey to Canada in her work, and talks a lot about the wider Black community locally, thinking about kind of where we're from and where we're going. This Blur series is an incredible leap for an artist who already had established herself with, the Smith series and other important works, but took it to another level. I know that there's a monumental version of one of her Blur images now in the AGO's collection. Maybe, Julie, you can talk a little bit about the Blur series and what it means to you.
I could be here all day talking about the Blur series. Yeah, again, like Dawid, Sandra is an artist that we've really watched develop in Toronto. This movement, and I use the word movement intentionally, to a more interdisciplinary or multimedia approach by Sandra is definitely exemplified in, the Blur series, because she's using a kind of photo transfer method, which is laborious, which does not produce a pristine, detailed photograph. That's not the point. You see the fissures and the holes and the texture, the materiality of the photograph, which is kind of counter to photography, and so I love that she's playing with all of those different kind of modalities and uncertainties with this series, which is literally about movement. The subjects are asked to move, which again is counter to a purist idea of photography. Your one is to stay still. So I love that she's always kind of playing with even the idea of photography, frankly. And so to have it in your book about photography is also challenging the many ways that we can think about photography, and the many ways that artists and in your collection are also challenging the notion of photography and the medium and its varied approaches.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Julie. The next image is from Michelle Pearson Clark, who is actually Toronto's photo laureate and doing wonderful work in that role, but is also an established artist and filmmaker and a teacher. And she has a great love of her own community. And I think this particular work was from a kind of a series that was an experiment for her, A Welcome Weight on My Body. And that was kind of focusing on analog images of still images of Caribbean Canadians, and they were her friends and family. So I loved that show, and it was a kind of a very kind of spontaneous gesture, her putting up photographs all over the gallery, some on the floor, some against the wall, some leaning, different kind of frames. There was nothing like the typical kind of pristine, linearity of like a typical photography exhibition. It was kind of like, almost mirroring a kind of a casualness among friends. And I had a difficult task of picking out 4 or 5 of the works because I love them all, but brought them into the Wedge collection. And, at Aperture, they decided to feature 3 of them in the book. One of them is of Gloria, and Gloria Swain's kind of a celebrated senior artist in the local community, and someone who cares about the younger generation and is very inspirational. So it's a kind of a fitting kind of portrait of a Toronto artist by another Toronto artist. So there's layers of meaning to the image, and lots to love about what Michelle is doing in the world of photography. If we go to the next image, this is work by Anike Jordan. She's a Trinidadian Canadian photographer who's sort of moving into more conceptual work as well. But she has a great love of the Black community and is concerned about how our history is represented. And this particular work is a kind of an ode to something that was lost. It's kind of an image that it's kind of a memorial. It honors the site of BME Church, a Black Methodist Episcopal church that used to stand in downtown Toronto. It's now a construction site. Condos are going up. On the day that she did this shoot, she wanted to get access right to the actual site and she could not. There was hoarding there and construction workers that were not permitted to go to the area. And she had her model kind of pose in the 4 cardinal points, north, south, east, west. And it's sort of 94 Chestnut Avenue in Toronto, and it's sort of at the crossroads, thinking about where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. And I think it's a really, really elegant way of kind of showing that. I think Anike is sort of on her way, doing lots of beautiful work that has a deep meaning for people in our community. So as you can see, there's a real focus in my Wedge collection on our emerging Black Canadian photographers. And I hope that the book will kind of do much to showcase that important and rising scene. I think we'll finish with an image by an artist that you turned me on to, Julie. I remember the day that you called me and said, go down to this student graduation show at, OCAD U, at Ontario College of Art and Design University. It's like, you've got to see this work. It's tintypes. It's like this young, Nigerian Canadian photographer, Bidemi Oliede. He's doing this work. You were so excited about it. So I'll just turn it over to you to tell me a little bit more about the artist and about his recent pairing with Gordon Parks. So give us some words about Bidemi, please.
What can I say? Bidemi is a kind of an old soul. He is a photographer's photographer. He is deeply committed to the medium, interested in, of course, older processes like tintypes, daguerreotypes. He's actually made daguerreotypes. So a very deep commitment to the history of the medium and using it, using the medium, using photography as a, sorry, I've lost my words. Using these older processes to take the photographs of Black Canadians that he knows, his friends, his colleagues, as a way of really, again, thinking about the history of photography, how photography was used against Black and Brown people as a kind of scientific tool, as a tool of anthropology. And he is basically reclaiming some of these old processes and of course, using, Black subjects as a way of kind of contesting that history. I really, really admire Bidemi's work. I'm so excited to see that he's part of your collection. I think you would have collected him even without my prompt, but he's going on to do some incredible things. And of course, as you mentioned, recently at Nicolas Metivier, his work was featured alongside Gordon Parks, and that was a wonderful dialogue of, the kind of, master Gordon Parks and a student, because Bidemi is also influenced by Parks's work as a, he has a whole series on a kind of street photography, again, representing Black subjects in Toronto in their everyday, but he has a very particular eye that he's able to capture basically the humanity of his subjects and in dialogue with Parks. So a wonderful photographer, and like you, I'm looking forward to where he goes.
Thank you, Julie. I have to just read one line you wrote so beautifully about the artist for the As We Rise Aperture book. I'll quote, you said, Bidemi Oliede makes tintype portraits a process that produces a unique positive image that cannot be reproduced, lending itself to deeper reflections about its suitability as a singular photo object for a range of Black subjects. And I think, you know, we'll probably end here, but just to say thank you to you, Julie, for your contributions to not only the Aperture book, but, you know, what you're doing for, you know, our community and what you're doing for photography. It's a wonderful thing, and, you know, seeing your evolution as well. So thank you for taking the time to talk with me today, and I look forward to sharing in the months ahead many more opportunities with you to talk about the works in the book. Thank you, Julie.
Well, thank you, Kenneth, for having me in conversation. And I'm anticipating the book as we rise. I think it will be, you know, another great addition to, you know, the books and texts on photography in the kind of Black Atlantic world. So congratulations. And yes, really looking forward to picking up a copy myself.
Yeah, we'll put one on your desk. All right. Thank you, Julie, and we'll see you soon. Goodbye, everyone.